PlayStation 2 gave us countless unforgettable games, but with time, some real gems have slipped under the radar. Today, we're revisiting 10 legendary PS2 titles that many players may have completely forgotten about. First up is Shadow of Rome, one of the most underrated games of the early 2000s. If you've been around my channel, you already know I love historically inspired games that mix strong storytelling with intense action, and this one nails both. The game follows two main characters. One is the son of a man falsely accused of assassinating Caesar, forced to fight for survival in the brutal gladiator arenas. The other is his loyal friend, who takes on stealth-driven missions behind the scenes to uncover the truth and clear his father's name. Despite its depth, Shadow of Rome never found big commercial success, which is why many players missed out on it. But those who did play it remember just how special it was. The gladiator battles were raw and exciting, letting you fight with swords, spears, maces, and even take part in adrenaline-pumping chariot combat. Meanwhile, the stealth sections added a clever contrast, challenging you to sneak past guards or knock them out without killing. It was a bold, unique mix of gameplay that truly set it apart in the PS2 library. Next up is Cold Fear, a survival horror title that many people compared to Resident Evil on a boat. It had the same third-person shooting and horror elements, but with a darker, almost Dead Space-like atmosphere. I'll admit, the controls took some getting used to, but once you adjusted, the combat felt surprisingly solid. While it was labeled as survival horror, Cold Fear leaned more toward action, though it never held back on difficulty. You were constantly fighting off zombie-like enemies in eerie, claustrophobic environments, all without the safety net of a map. That uncertainty added to the tension, keeping you on edge the entire time. Unfortunately, it released right around the launch of Resident Evil 4, which overshadowed it completely. Still, for fans of horror action hybrids, Cold Fear remains an overlooked gem that deserves a second look. Moving on, we have The Getaway, a game that stood out during a time when crime-focused titles were everywhere. Unlike many of its peers, The Getaway leaned heavily on cinematic inspiration, drawing from classic British gangster films like Get Carter and Snatch. The developers clearly wanted more than just another open-world shooter, and it showed. What set The Getaway apart was its commitment to realism. There was no traditional HUD, and even the traffic patterns were designed to feel authentic, creating a level of immersion that was rare back then. The visuals, while dated today, were cutting edge at the time, and paired with strong voice acting, the whole game had a movie-like quality. Where some games leaned into satire or struggled to take themselves seriously, The Getaway nailed the gritty crime thriller vibe perfectly, cementing itself as one of the PS2's most ambitious titles. On the topic of gritty action, let's talk about 50 Cent, Bulletproof. This game was raw, loud, and unapologetically brutal. You played as 50 Cent himself, hunting down the people who tried to take him out. The plot was simple, but it carried enough attitude to stick with players long after they put the controller down. At its core, it was a third-person shooter, but it wasn't just non-stop gunfights. You rolled with your crew, cracked safes, collected clues, and snuck through buildings to push the story forward. The combat was especially savage, Vicious gun battles mixed with brutal melee takedowns and sharp weapons that gave fights a bloody edge. If anything felt off, it was the oddly weak damage from enemy bullets. Then again, with a title like Bulletproof, it almost fit the theme.
What the fuck is that?
Now, moving on to one of my personal favorites, Total Overdose. This game completely defined my childhood and, in many ways, was one of the most entertaining open-world experiences outside of GTA. The story was fun, the pacing kept you hooked, and honestly, I thought the shooting felt even tighter than GTA's at the time. While some areas were locked until you pushed further into the main missions, the world still gave you plenty of freedom to cause chaos. The real highlight, though, was the over-the-top combat. Imagine Max Payne meets GTA, with slow-motion dives that let you dodge bullets and take out enemies in cinematic fashion. It wasn't just about winning fights, it was about doing it with style. The only real downside? There just weren't enough missions. They were so good that I replayed the game over and over again, wishing for more. It's a shame it never got a sequel, because Total Overdose absolutely deserved one. The early 2000s were a golden time for beat-em-ups, and God Hand was one of the most unusual and memorable of them all. Critics didn't exactly treat it kindly. IGN even slammed it in their review. But for players who gave it a chance, it delivered non-stop fun. What made it stand out was the freedom to customize your fighting style. You could string together over-the-top combos from a massive pool of unique moves, giving every battle a sense of chaos and creativity. The tone was just as wild, never taking itself too seriously. The game constantly threw waves of enemies at you in outrageous, often hilarious scenarios. While the regular enemies weren't anything special, the boss fights were where the game truly shined, giving players some of the most entertaining and unpredictable encounters on the PS2. It's quirky, tough, and definitely one of the console's most underrated gems. Switching gears, let's talk about Mosquito. One of the strangest simulation games the PS2 ever saw. Long before titles like Goat Simulator grabbed attention, Mr. Mosquito was pushing the boundaries of weird in gaming. You played as a mosquito seeking revenge against a family trying to squash you for good. The concept sounds ridiculous, but its goofy charm and clever writing made it surprisingly addictive. The gameplay was simple on paper. Sneak up on humans, drain their blood, dodge their frantic swats, avoid bug spray, and weave through random household hazards. But in practice, it required sharp reflexes and precise flying skills to survive each level. The graphics were surprisingly solid for the time, and the upbeat soundtrack gave it extra personality. Mr. Mosquito was challenging, funny, and unlike anything else, making it one of the most unforgettable oddities in the PS2 library. Next on the list is Hash 25 to Life. Probably the most overlooked game here. It definitely had its rough edges. The controls felt clunky at times, and the story wasn't exactly groundbreaking. But beneath those flaws was a surprisingly solid experience, especially in multiplayer. The game was built around the classic cops versus criminals setup, with law enforcement trying to shut down gangs as criminals worked to build their reputation and expand their empire. Gameplay leaned heavily into action, delivering intense shootouts across gritty environments that gave off serious Max Payne vibes. While the gunplay could feel a bit sluggish, the variety of missions and mix of mechanics kept it engaging. It never quite reached its full potential, but 25 to Life still brought a unique spin to the genre and deserves more recognition than it got.
What's up, my niecey? Take him down. What? I'm not gonna ask again.
You scared of a girl?
Take him down.
Switching gears, we've got Downhill Domination, a game that not nearly enough people remember. While Road Rash was all about chaotic motorcycle combat, Downhill Domination took that same energy and launched it straight down a mountain. This was an adrenaline-fueled downhill biking game where speed, stunts, and pure chaos defined the experience. You weren't just racing to the bottom, you were pulling off wild tricks off cliffs and ridges, all while throwing water bottles and other objects at your rivals to keep them off your tail. The result was pure madness from start to finish, and that's exactly what made it so addictive. Back in the day, I spent hours perfecting stunts and fighting to stay ahead of the competition. Loud, fast, and completely over the top, Downhill Domination was an unforgettable PS2 classic.
This must be a dream. Talking about. I can see the world.
Finally, we come to what I'd call the best mafia game of the early 2000s, The Godfather. For fans of the legendary film, this was pure gold. Not only did it feature the iconic characters, but it let you step into the role of an up-and-coming mobster under Don Corleone himself. The missions captured the essence of mob life perfectly. From extortion and intimidation to busting rival businesses, taking out enemy gang members, and expanding your control across the city, everything felt authentic. Even the simpler or more repetitive missions had weight, never coming across as meaningless filler. What really brought it to life, though, was the stellar voice acting. Every character interaction felt rich with personality, making the game's world feel alive and true to the source material. For anyone who loves mafia-style games, The Godfather was a must-play experience on the PS2.
You better say some prayers because God has forgotten.
Looking back at these titles really hits me with nostalgia. We've come such a long way in gaming, but classics like these laid the foundation for so many of the games we enjoy today. Some might have slipped from memory, but their impact is still there. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these PS2 games do you still remember, and which one was your personal favorite? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. That's it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.